You are invited to think, dream, love, and scream about this marvellous, magnificent, beautiful world we live in. Now, helping us think, dream, love, and scream that little bit more about this world tonight is Jerry Wills. Jerry is a healer. He's an explorer, an adventurer. He's a TV documentary filmmaker. But tonight, Jerry is talking about his healing work.
Because there's a lot of information that people don't have, and I think that if they had it, they might be a lot better off.
I,
Mm-hmm.
from what I gather, your healing came to the public for, I suppose, was it in 1998? Was there a guy called Steve who you helped, who
Yeah,
you were called in to help? He was in a coma, and you were the last resort, essentially.
yeah,
And
that's
from there, yeah.
well. What happened there is that Fox News got a hold of it. A friend of mine had been bugging Fox News to do stories on UFOs, and he's an obnoxious character. But he got a hold of Rod Haberer at the news desk and insisted that Rod hear about this story. So, Rod didn't know what to make of it. But what had happened is with a fellow named Steve, that I'm not sure what happened to him, but he ended up in a coma. They had removed part of his skull, had tubes in his head, of all things, and he had been desperately ill before this. Well, they were going to unplug him because his insurance ran out, and there wasn't any hope of survival. That's what the records all said, and that's what I was told when I was summoned over there. And going into something like this, with what I do, even now, and we're 20 years later, nearly 20 years later, um, I never know what's going to happen. But, back then, I really wasn't doing this professionally. I was just working out of my shop. Um, had no extra room to do anything, but people would come in, they needed help, so I'd work on them and send them on their merry way. A lot of good things happened during that period, but to be called over to an issue like this was, well, it was a bit frightening. I'd really never been into a hospital to work on anyone, and here I was in a hospice room where a guy wasn't expected to ever recover, and he was going to be unplugged in the morning. So I'm basically looking at, the precursor to a dead man, and felt a bit intimidated because of that. But I had to just brush it off, because I don't know what to expect. I started working on him. His wife was there, and she didn't really think anything was going to happen. Nobody did. And after about 20 minutes of working on him, during that period of time, I saw what was happening and set about to fix first this thing, then the other. Found him lying curled up, I guess in a metaphoric sense perhaps, but in the spiritual realm or whatever you call it, he was just curled up on some soft grass. So I went over and shook him, woke him up, told him it's time to come back to the living, follow me. So he got up, followed me, and then the scene changed for me. And when it did, I opened my eyes, because I had them closed while I was working on him. And I said, it's time to wake up now. And I stood there and waited. And it took about a minute, and he started fluttering his eyes. And then he opened them, looked around the room. He couldn't talk, but he could look around. He was no longer in a coma. And of course, a nurse happened to be there about the same time. She just got totally freaked out, pushed a little button she carried with her, and doctors came rushing, and little alarms were going off outside. Not really loud, but just noticeable that there was something different. and Steve had awakened. His wife was just collapsed in a corner in the side of the room.
Wow.
About, I don't know, maybe a week or two later, because after this happened, I said, all right, well, that's what I came here to do, and I left. Went out to the car, lit up a cigarette, and drove off. Went back over there because I was asked to come back, as apparently, even though he was awake, he was quite blind. He was unable to speak. No one really knew what was going on with him. So I went back. And of course, he looked at me like, he was a little shocked. Of course, I'm nearly 7 foot tall. I guess maybe I look quite large to him as well. And went back, started doing the same thing. Started looking inside to see what I could see. I found the problems. So I corrected them. Little blood clots here and there. And he had his eyes closed. I told him to close his eyes while I was doing this. And then I said, all right, open your eyes. Well, as it turns out, he could now see. And in a very hoarse voice, he just almost above a whisper, he said, who are you? And I said, I'm Jerry. It's nice to meet you, Steve. And he says, no, who are you? I can see. And he just like startled, says, I can speak. He says, oh my God, there's so much pain. And I said, where is your pain? And he kind of moved his left arm a little bit. So I took a look, saw he had a problem with his heart. So I corrected that. The pain went away. And then he was all right. I mean, he had quite a recovery, I suppose, but he was all right as far as I was concerned. He was going to be fine. So I left. And that's when, after that is when Rod Haberer from Fox News, the news director, got involved. And they did a story about it. And that story is out there. It's probably on my site. I think it is. The ratings they got for that story were better than any ratings they had ever gotten for really any story that they had done. So they saw that this was a great opportunity to increase the dynamics of their ratings challenge, because all the stations are really competing for viewers. So they have what's called the sweeps, and twice a year they would do a story about me and they would win the sweeps. And they did that for, I don't know, 10, 11 years.
They picked up on your story immediately and carried on following you and following it for a long time.
Yeah,
yeah.
Eventually, Rod Haber and I became friends because he was, I mean, you have an idea about the iconic newspaper guy that's just looking for the truth and the story. And here I was, in his eyes, a faith healer. And I had started charging at that point. It's $350 US, and it's always been $350. And so I had Rod wondering if I was some kind of like a scam artist or something. That's probably being more harsh than what the reality is that he was thinking, but that's really what it boils down to. Because, I mean, after all, let's get serious. Faith healers, really?
You're in that situation, I suppose. You're coming into a situation, such as in the hospital, where you're having to essentially prove yourself to a degree to many people's skeptical eyes, and to be taken even semi-seriously.
Well, that's exactly right. Because I'm not a doctor. I don't have any medical background. I'm an electronics engineer. You know, I've got a lot of background in the technical end of the world, but nothing like that. Well, Rod decided that he was going to start following the stories, the people that I worked with, keeping in mind that not everyone is helped. You know, vast majority are, but some people just aren't, and I don't know why. I guess it's God's will, whatever God is. Well, after a few years of doing this, I had already worked on members of Rod's family. He'd seen me working on animals and people. And 6 years into it now, he had been with me when I worked on animals and people, and he'd been sitting in on classes I was teaching and all this. He had come to the conclusion that I wasn't a get rich quick scheme, and that, you know, this was a real thing. So at about 6 years in, he decided that he was going to write a book about me. And he did. It's called Healer, the Jerry Wills story. It's on Amazon. And, you know, the book has been widely received. Can't think of anyone who's ever said anything negative about it. Everyone thinks it reads well and is good, you know, the details, the information. I tried to read it, but honestly, I find it very boring. It doesn't do much for me, but a lot of other folks seem to like it.
Okay. So I suppose if you're reading a story about your own life, then you must be seeing it and reading it from a different set of eyes. But
Yeah.
I'd like to search that one out. I'll try to find that at some point.
Yeah, well, you might like it. I've been I've been thinking about doing an audio book, you know, where I record myself reading my version of the book, which is a little different than Rod's because he wanted me to actually write it in first person, and I started,
Yeah.
but I really never finished. I got kind of hung up on the Sharon Stone part and just,
Okay.
just didn't really have the ability to. I didn't know how far to go with what I was going to say in there, and it just kind of kept me from finishing.
Okay.
You know, that's what is it? It's one of the chapters about the healer goes to Hollywood or something.
Okay. I'll have to read the book now. That sounds too intriguing. Okay. So you should do an audio book. Most people these days, or a lot of people I know, listen to audio books. That would
Yeah.
be an idea. Yeah.
Well, we do audiobooks all the time. We listen to a series called Deathlands by
Mhm.
James Axler. It's graphic audio, and it's we just love audiobooks.
Mm. Mm. I tend to listen to a lot of audio interviews. Probably some of your own that you've done over the time. So back to the healing and your
Mhm.
ongoing healing now.
Mm.
I notice you obviously have your webpage, Jerry Wills Healer. Is that what it's called?
Just
JerryWills.com.
just jerrywills.com.
JerryWills.com. There it is. Yeah. And I was reading your healer's mantra, your healer's prayer, and the story about how you came upon that. Um, do you still recite that to yourself before each and every healing? Is that something that you do daily anyway, or is there more that you do to help yourself prepare, if you like, before you enter? Is it the state you call it? I read somewhere you mentioned it's the state that you go into before you're healing.
Yeah, it's a frame of reference, state of being.
Yeah.
I do use that frequently. I wouldn't say I use it every day,
Hmm.
but you know, past a point of reciting that to yourself, it sort of flashes through you very rapidly, so that I guess it just sort of reminds me
Hmm.
of my place in the universe and the level of confidence that I need in order to move forward and do the things that I do.
Yeah. Yes, I read it, and it's a beautiful prayer, and I may try it myself. I work in not quite a similar field, but a sort of a health field, so I might try that myself before I work with people and see how I feel. Hopefully, I'll benefit as well.
Yeah, you know, the real trick to doing that is just look at yourself in a mirror while you're reading it.
Yeah.
Let it sink in.
Mm. Back to your your healing, you're talking about working with Steve, and something that intrigued me was when you first worked with him, you said that you went to the spirit world or wherever, and he was curled up on the grass,
Hmm.
and then you helped him to come back to his physical body. And then the second time, you talked about seeing blocked arteries and blocked vessels in his body, seeing physical complaints almost.
Yeah.
Um, are these? Would you differentiate those as being separate ways of looking and working? Because one on the surface appears to be, at least out of body, almost different realm, and one is almost the matrix creating the physical and the body. Are they separate, or are they the same type of work you're doing?
I'd say it's the same.
Okay.
In that realm, there are many destinations, many houses, but it's all in the same realm. When I went looking for Steve, I was just wondering, asking myself, where are you? Where have you gone? And I was just drawn inward through the darkness until finally this emerged as a vision in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
That conversation, of course, was nonverbal, as was the conversation with Steve was nonverbal at that point.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm looking inside the body, it's really the same thing. I close my eyes and I'm just somewhere else.
Okay.
It's kind of hard to explain. I've worked on I've worked on several people in Australia and Europe and Asia and across the United States and Canada and South America, Africa. Done this remotely because, after all, I can't travel to all of these places. It would just be insane. So I call this remote presence, which is a term that I coined from a conversation with my friend Ingo Swan. Before he died, he and I and Kathy were good friends. He really adored Kathy, and we would talk about remote viewing because he's the father of remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and he knew what I was able to do. He was very keen on it and supported it and wanted to offer any guidance he could offer, which was really nice of him because he's quite talented. And in the conversation one day, he was asking me, do you work on people over the phone? And I said, well, yeah, I do. Well, how do you do that? Do you do remote viewing? And I said, no, I actually go there. He says, what do you call it? I said, I call it healing. I don't know. And he says, well, if you're there, you're a presence, aren't you? And I said, well, that's true. He says, so this is your term. I'm helping you with this. From now on, it's called remote presence. And it stuck. It seemed like the perfect answer to the lack of, lack of terminology that I was suffering from at the time.
Yeah, sounds perfect. Yeah. Mm. When you're using your remote presence, do you find that you are aware with your physical senses of the surroundings, or is it, as you said before, going into yourself almost and coming out at that place? Would it be more a question of an internal awareness, or is there a physicalness to you there? Do you feel?
Well, it's a little bit of both,
Mm-hmm.
really. For example, I was working on this one fellow, an older man. He was the father of a friend of ours. And I just basically did the same thing I always do. I just transferred myself there. And so I could stand there, I could look down on him, I could see the room, I could feel, you know, the room if I needed to, I could smell the smells if I needed to. And of course, he had no idea about this sort of thing. All he knew was I was a voice on the phone.
Yeah, yeah.
And he says, I don't know how you're able to do this just over the phone. I said, well, because I'm standing right here near you. And he says, yeah, well, then what am I wearing? So I described it to him.
Yeah.
Told him the shirt, the pants, and so forth. I said, by the way, that light on in the closet, could you ask your wife to turn that off before she leaves the room?
Okay.
And he just came unglued. He says, how the hell do you know that? And his wife in the background going, oh my.
Must have freaked them out a little bit, certainly.
And
But
I've done that on quite a few occasions, not really intending to startle anyone, but one gal says she didn't really believe that I could be present like that.
hmm
And so I said, all right, I'll give you some proof. And she let out a howl. She says, ow. So
okay.
what's wrong? She said, well, I felt like someone poked me in the ribs. I said, that was me.
Hmm.
And she says, I don't believe it. So I poked her again. She says, okay, I got it.
That's that's quite a cool party trick you've got there. That would be yeah. So you're certainly convincing people. So taking away that any doubt as well, which I suppose I don't know if that inhibits in any way your work if they're skeptical and doubting. But I know some people, some healers talk about that. But
Well, it can be a double-edged sword because it could also be very intimidating. That's why I don't do it hardly at all.
yeah, of course, I imagine it would be. Um, so the healing you do, I remember you saying a long time ago. I remember you saying that you're not entirely sure how it works and what is happening. And the fact that it does work, I suppose, is the important point. But that it's also slightly different, perhaps, to how other healers may work. I think, if I remember rightly, you were talking about you see almost the physical matrix or the physical, well, not the physical, the pre-physical almost substrate before the physical form, and then the healing that needs to be done there. Am I along the right lines?
I think so. When I transfer myself somewhere and start looking, the first thing I'm looking at is the field around the body. Some
Mm-hmm.
people call it the aura, but that's
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of what terms a person wants to use. I'm just saying field because it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
My background's in electronics. You have a magnet, you have a magnetic field.
Yeah.
Well, I look at the field around the body and make a quick assessment because that doesn't tell you a whole lot really. And some people get hung up on colors, and this color means that, and this color means the other. I don't pay any attention to that. I'm looking for the strength of the field, the texture. What does it look like? How is it moving? And that gives me some clues occasionally. But then I immediately just move on through that and go directly into the body. I don't spend a lot of time outside, and quite honestly, for the little bit of information a field can give me, I can get a lot more information by going inside.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to do that more than anything else.
Okay, so you're not just using what we call the aura, or that sort of external energy field. I've seen your Lightbox blog and description of the Lightbox you say to make on your site.
Oh yeah,
That looks quite interesting. I started looking into that. I might try and make one myself, or try to find one to play around with that.
now they're a lot of fun. You can see some pretty amazing things when you build one of these.
Mm.
The real trick is to not have any other light anywhere near you. You just want it to be completely black, pitch dark.
Okay. I'll try that. I'll look into that because it's an area that has fascinated me for some time. Um, I suppose the electromagnetic and the energetic realm really that we live in and that we are, and any tools we can use in this reality to kind of open ourselves a wee bit to that must be a good thing surely. So hopefully that will help.
Yeah, it didn't take long to be able to see the aura.
Yeah.
That's pretty simple stuff.
We'll try that. Now, going back to, if we can, to talking about your state and the perceptive state, I suppose, and your self state that you're in when you do this work. and your trips to Peru, sort of entering an area here that may or may not be relevant at all, but I've been reading a lot recently about the native shamans and then the ayahuasca ceremonies down in Peru.
Sure.
When 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 somebody is participating in the ceremonies, or the shaman themselves who have spent many years, obviously, developing themselves and learning the ropes, as they say, would that state be in any way comparable or approaching, or would there be a crossover there with the state that you tend to use for your healing work?
Well, it's apples and oranges, really, Rick.
Mm-hmm.
I've done ayahuasca, I don't know, maybe 20 times.
Okay.
And of course, every time is different. And it does open up the door for going into the psychic realm, if you can label it that, into this extra physical realm to where you can see things, know things that otherwise you don't see or you don't know. But, as far as the state that I go into to do the work that I do, ayahuasca has helped. It's really helped me to get greater clarity and focus and a greater depth of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the same thing as having used ayahuasca.
So you're not creating almost a self DMT experience at the same time. As you're, not directly anyway, not intentionally
Sure.
anyway. Yeah, I understand. Just a crossover that made me curious for a moment.
Well, keep in mind that DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine,
Mm-hmm.
is responsible for, it's in every one of us, and it's responsible for the ability to speak comprehensively, to understand, to learn, to smell, to see, to touch and feel and taste. It is the essential God molecule in every one of us that enables us to be able to have the life that we're used to right now. When you use ayahuasca, you're putting in more than what your body makes,
Mm-hmm.
and it causes you to become hyper aware. And I think that maybe one of the differences between a person who has no psychic ability and someone who has profound psychic ability really is the amount of dimethyltryptamine that is being made by their brain, because it enhances the process of the senses to the point to where you become more and more sensitive to the energies and the unseen realm around you. And in that respect, it does have a direct connection, but the experience between the two is quite a bit different.
Okay. Certainly, the DMT and the God particle, I think you called it, the spirit molecule, as it's known. It's certainly an area that I think science is starting to, some areas of science anyway, is starting to look into with somewhat of an open mind.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, I envisage a wonderful future where it's understood and accepted and more of a part of our society, really, rather than misunderstood.
And it's quite ironic that in most of the world, DMT is an illegal substance, and yet everyone has it in them. And it's not unlike cannabis. Life isn't possible. Human life isn't possible without cannabinoids.
The cannabinoid system. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when you get older, your endocannabinoid system begins to fail. It doesn't produce as much as it used to. These cannabinoids protect cells. They kill off cancer, should it start in the body. They help to keep you from getting inflamed. They help to remedy pain. They protect your brain. There's just so many things that cannabinoids do. And yet, when you get older, these things are becoming less and less viable.
Mm-hmm.
There's less and less of it in your system. And so, in order to stay healthy, you need to use cannabinoids from cannabis, whether you smoke it, eat it, drink it, however you use it.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get it in your body because your body is craving this in order to be at its peak. But politicians have turned it into something even worse than alcohol, worse than heroin. They've turned it into this monster. And I think the underlying truth here is that, of course, they're completely ignorant on one hand, or they have an agenda on the other. And of course, I don't know what it is. But if you need it to be healthy, then why shouldn't all people have access to it?
I concur completely. I suspect that politicians are probably both ignorant, naive, and following an agenda, but perhaps they're not entirely clued up to the full agenda. But certainly society, if you look at society from the outside, in Western society,
Mm-hmm.
the Western world we all tend to live in, it is a bit of a messed up, upside down approach to freedom of sovereignty, really, and to liberty, and to health within that, because the state dictates what can and cannot be allowed to be used by somebody or not be used, based upon their own agenda, like you say. Whether that's a valid agenda or not, whether it's covert or overt, it's an agenda. And
Well, in some ways, Rick, it's covert because the two major players keeping it illegal are the alcohol companies
mm-hmm.
and the pharmaceutical companies. Those are the two big players. People had free access to cannabis, then they probably wouldn't drink the way they do. And if they got sick, they could use cannabis instead of an opiate for their pain. So, there's a lot of money to be lost here by these people, and they have more money than God. So they're going to make sure that their position is going to be protected, and they do that through the people who make the laws.
Absolutely. And following on from that, I noticed that you've talked in some of on your webpage. I don't know if it was jerrywills.com that I saw this on, or maybe it was on the radio show, Jerry Wills, the Jerry Wills Show, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
.com.
Yeah, jerrywellshow.com.
That's right. One or two of those, you were talking about supplements to take, you were discussing different nutritional needs the body has, so obviously all of that comes into play from this side, from the physical side, if you like, before the energetic healing, if you like, can help as well. Do you see, or do you have a relationship with the different elements, maybe, and chemicals and energies in those plants and herbs and so on?
I do.
What I'm trying to say is, we talk about ayahuasca and the divine, the mother and the intelligence there,
Mm-hmm.
and that intelligence and consciousness being in everything, in every plant and every element, really.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if in your state and in your awareness you can work with those or communicate or maybe, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, and I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do. A good example of that is when we have in the past taken people with us on a trip to the Amazon jungle and other locations in Peru as well. And when using ayahuasca and there's a healing that needs to occur, then the ayahuasca lights the person up like a neon sign for me. I can go in much more easily and maneuver the energies with a lot less struggle. So, I do use it in that respect. The same is true, really, with any of the, the things that a person can use. And there are some things a person should use that they don't, and other things they use plenty of, but there's no point in. And it's just a matter of education, I suppose. But I try to educate folks on things that'll work really well for them, and the things they're using that might not work so well, because let's face it, if you're only using a tiny amount of something that's good for you, it's only going to do a tiny amount of good. So some things are, some things are out there, and folks just don't know how much to use. They don't know if they should use it. A good example of that is iodine. Iodine is an essential component of life. It's an essential mineral. It's part of the halogen family.
Mm.
Uh, every cell needs it, and the human body needs about somewhere in the neighborhood of 64.7 milligrams of iodine per day, I think it was. We suggest, because you can get a tablet that's 50 milligrams, and so we suggest people use it. But it doesn't stop there, because if you're going to use that, you also need to use another tablet, which is B2 and B3 in a specific blend. And all that means really is that, it's what is it? It's 100 milligrams of one and 500 milligrams of the other, or something, and just mixed together. Specific dosage in each part. But you can get that through a tablet called ATP cofactors, Atom Tom Paul cofactors, and you use those two together, and iodine, which normally isn't transmitted through the entire body because there's no mechanism in the body to do that, but you use them together, and it goes to every cell of your body because the iodine sticks to the red blood cells, and it goes even into the brain.
That sounds positive. That sounds good.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and the end result, you feel wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
The first couple of days, you'll have a metallic taste in your mouth. That'll go away, but your endurance level will skyrocket. You'll feel better. Your brain will wake up. You'll feel really good.
Nice.
And so you just use it every day. I've been using it every day for, gosh, I don't know, over 10 years.
Well, it's certainly a good billboard for it. So that's a good one to look out for. I'll
Yeah.
look into that one. What about general nutritional dietary input to people's diet these days? Processed foods. The negative aspect of that. I mean, it must suck. What do we call it? Life force, life energy. It must take that away from us as we're trying to balance out almost the dead negative energy we're putting into our bodies. Not necessarily yourself, but a lot of us.
Well, even me.
Even you? Okay.
I like hot dogs, hamburgers, apple pie.
You're only human, I suppose, or perhaps.
Well,
So
I live on Earth, so,
yeah, exactly.
when it comes right down to nutrition, it isn't necessarily what you eat. It's what's been added to it that isn't good for you. Because you see, ultimately, what happens is that everything is broken down to its molecular level and then its atomic level. That's how it works in the body. And it doesn't matter if it's a dead bird or a piece of steak. If you can manage to eat a fresh, dead bird, you're going to get some protein out of the meat of that bird. If you eat the steak, you're going to get some protein out of the steak. It's going to break down equally well. But where the problem here is when you have artificial colorings, you have artificial flavorings, and you have things like like MSG or one of the artificial sugars. These things are disastrous to the body. People drink Diet Coke, for example. They don't have a clue. They don't know that if they want to lose weight, they're drinking Diet Coke. Well, actually, it causes changes in your body to where you're craving carbohydrates. And it's damaging the liver, it's damaging the brain, it's getting into your bloodstream. Not good for you. Artificial colors, they are made from something called coal tar dye, which basically is, out of the stacks of coal burning plants. The tar that comes off of the coal, I'm not saying they get it from the stacks, but they get it from coal, and it's just tar. And by adding a couple chemicals here or there, they can either turn it into a fragrance or they can turn it into a food coloring. And these food colorings and these fragrances are classified as mutagenics. which basically means they mutate the DNA at the DNA level. They cause mutations. It's very, very unhealthy. But, in the United States, you have candies like M&Ms that are, different colors. You see icing on cake that's blue or red. That's coal tar dye. So you have a fragrance thing you hang into your car, or it's puffing in your house someplace, thing that makes it smell like roses, perhaps, or lilacs. Well, that's coal tar dye. You're breathing it in.
Yeah.
And eventually you're wondering, when you're very sick with something dreadfully wrong, you're wondering, how the hell did this happen to me? I've led a clean life. I've done all the right things. I exercise. I'm a good person. Why is this happening to me? Well, it's because you didn't have the knowledge that you needed in order to stay healthy.
There's part of the covert manipulation going on there. Why it's kept from people, and why people are maybe money's a big factor.
Well, yeah, and convenience.
But also maintaining a populace that doesn't question everything, because questioning some things then will inevitably lead to questioning more, and down comes the house of cards.
Well, honestly, it becomes quite a conundrum, because so many things that you might be eating are probably contaminated with something that's dreadfully wrong, that isn't good for you at all. And it becomes quite a thing, because you're going, well, what am I going to eat? Everything I like has got this, that, and the other in it. And I'm hungry. What am I going to do? I can't go out and grow my own vegetables. I can't go out and slaughter my own cows. I have to depend upon the farmers, the ranchers, and so forth to do this. And you hope that they're doing things in such a way that ensures your safety. But honestly, even though your safety is important to them, because they're not heartless creatures, but the bottom line for them is, how much are they going to get financially for what it is they're providing, so they can stay alive, take care of their family, and be in business. And there's a trade-off eventually that occurs. The what's it called? Glyphosate or glycosate or something.
Yeah, glyphosate. Yeah.
That's it. I never could say the word right.
So, Roundup. That's where it.
Yeah, and nasty stuff. And we were reading an article a couple of days ago. Some of the wine coming from California, every sample that they tested at this facility had this stuff in it. Well, that's not good.
No, it's clearly not good. It's not a good product.
Yeah, it's in the wine, it's in the water, it's in the food. It's how do you get away from this? And to make it even more complicated, the clothes that you're wearing, if the cotton was sprayed with this stuff, it's still in the cotton. It's getting soaked into your skin right through the cotton. The fire retardant, same thing.
We are living in a more and more toxic world, certainly. Difficult one to get away from, like you say. And I suppose you shouldn't try to get away from it, perhaps. Just try to live more healthily in it, and maybe try to do what you can in some small way to change how things are.
Well, I agree with you. And I don't mean to come across as a fatalist with all of this. But it's knowledge that makes a difference.
I think you're being a realist, Joey. It's there, it's happening, so rather than ignoring it, you're acknowledging it, which is what needs to be done.
Well, thank you for that. I was starting to feel like a fatalist.
No, absolutely not. You're resonating with my thinking, but I like to think of myself as being more almost an objective realist. It is what it is, and deal with it as it is, because it's still going to be there if you don't. So, I see a deeper connection between maybe what's happening in our environment, what's happening in our nutritional or lack of nutritional sense, what's happening as far as knowledge, the whole pharmaceutical companies, it's all connected into one big melting pot, and I see a connection there, but that's perhaps for a different time. So Jerry, to wrap up, your shows, your radio shows, how often do they go out? How often do you do those?
Well, actually, it hasn't happened for a couple of years because we were on
Oh,
the road for 18 months. And then after coming off the road, there was so much to catch up on. We put on, what was it, about 42,000 miles, I think.
well, okay.
So it was a lot of driving.
Yeah.
So anyway, Kathy and I are going to start a new radio series. It's going to be soon. I don't have a start date for it just yet,
Okay.
but it's going to be called Journeys. And
Ah,
this
yes.
this has to do with the story of our journey together, looking around the world at ancient sites and the strange things we've encountered, and really kind of a play-by-play that no one's ever heard before. You know, what is it like to be trekking through the Andes, not knowing where you're going, um, having to wear a little badge over your heart so the snipers don't shoot you because you're going into a place where no white guys ever come out of alive.
Okay. Yeah, quite a journey there, I imagine.
Yeah, and there's so many stories, so many stories. So we thought this might be fun. We have all of our notes, all of our memories.
Hmm.
So I thought it might be a big fun thing, just to start a radio series that we just go right on through right to present day.
That sounds like a great idea. From the stories I've heard of you, you tell over the years, there's plenty in there that I think folks would love to hear. And there's always people coming across this material, your material, who haven't been into it before, haven't heard of it before. So for
Hmm.
them to hear the stories, even for their first time, certainly, yeah, good to do. Between your audiobook chapters, I presume, you'll
Hmm.
do your radio shows.
Yeah.
Okay, how would people hear about that? I mean, via your Facebook page, which is there's Expeditions TV, isn't there? The website
Yeah.
and the Facebook.
Probably the most sure way of finding out about it would be to sign up for our newsletter. It's called the Expeditions Newsletter. You can go to jerrywills.com and just sign up there for the newsletter, or you can go to expeditions.tv and sign up for it there. Expeditions is spelled with an X, not EX. It's just X. So it's XPEDITIONS.TV. But yeah, the newsletter would be the most surefire way of staying up to date with what we're doing and what's going on.
Great. I look forward to that show, that radio show, um, as well as the audio book. But in the meantime, I might try to find that book myself and have a good read. But first of all, thank you, Jerry, for coming on, for being a guest, being my first guest. Um, and yeah, I hope very much that you manage to keep doing the work you're doing. Any plans to get down to Peru? Do any more direct adventuring soon?
Actually, yeah, we're just putting the finishing touches. We haven't done a trip down there in quite a few years. So we're going to send this out in the newsletter soon, but it's a trip to Peru. We're going to be going to the jungle for the ayahuasca experience, and then after that, we're going to have another few things we're going to do in some remote areas of Peru most people never see. So that's going to be the first part of January, as it looks right now,
Hmm.
and it should be a great deal of fun. And we're making the trip really affordable. You know, I mean, I was talking to someone yesterday that was telling me that they were going to spend $10,000 to go do something like this.
Wow.
And I said, "You got to be kidding me! That's an awful lot of money." Well, it's for my wife and I. That's still a lot of money. He says, "Well, how much is your trip?" And I said, "Well, I just finished up those figures for the jungle part. It's $1,650, 1,650."
Wow.
And he says, "That's really cheap." I said, "Well, no, it just doesn't need to be that expensive."
Yeah, yeah. So that's for people to come along with you, and that's just for the ceremonies and the transportation in the jungle. Would that be?
No, no, that's going down, staying at a lodge, and what is it, 5, 6 days, I think, at the lodge.
Hmm.
It doesn't cover international airfare, but it covers everything else.
That does sound affordable, certainly, considering the prices I've looked into, looking at the packages people put together and the cost of some of the retreats down there. They certainly do.
Hmm. Well, thank you, Rick. It's a real privilege to be on with you. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, I will. Bye bye.